We're here today at a very sunny Larford Lakes complex, and we're going to be fishing a very simple approach. We know that most commercials like this are actually stuffed with fish, and sometimes the simplest approaches are the best. So today I'm going to be fishing with one rod, a nice simple approach. I'm going to be fishing within pole range as well as further out into the lake. I've got a very simple bait tray, and I think if we get the approach just right, I think we're going to be in for a great day. Well, I'm faced with a very attractive looking peg today. Obviously location, especially in the colder months, is important, but it's important as the weather starts to get warmer as well. And when you're faced with a peg like this, you've got multiple choices, okay? There are different areas of the swim to target in different ways and at different times. All those little things can make a huge difference. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be feeding a short line by hand, and that's really going to be regarded as a positive line. I can feed that simply by hand whilst I'm fishing further out. The longer line is the line I'm going to start on, and that is a much more negative line. I'm going to kick off with an open method feeder, and I'm going to be fishing that towards that island, but because the water is still a little bit cold, I'm just going to fish it down that slope a little bit, just down into that slightly deeper water. I'm sure we're going to get a response from that. If we don't catch on that line, one of the things we have got is that we've got the option of looking at where fish are moving. We're also going to be able to tell if we're getting any line bites or anything like that. So even if I'm not catching on that negative line, it might help to know where the fish are. So because I'm starting negative, it won't be a big deal if I've got to move out into this open water. And all the time I'm fishing that line, I'm going to be building up that shorter line to tackle a little bit later on. So the setup, you couldn't get really much simpler than this. There's no big long casting to be done here, so a nice Horizon Pro commercial 3-meter rod. That's all I'm using today, or 10 foot. This is the feeder version, not the bomb version. The feeder version is a little bit tougher. It's got a little bit more backbone to it, and there are some big fish in here, so this will be able to handle anything that we hook. Because it's only a 10-foot rod, or 3 meters, that is coupled perfectly with a 3000 Horizon reel. It's a lovely balance. It's one of my favourite setups, and that on that reel is just 6-pound Horizon mono, and that is it. No fancy shock leaders or anything like that. I've got a 1.5 ounce tip in, which will help tackle any of those bigger fish. It'll just help us get them under control, and we are going to be fishing with a method feeder. All right, so obviously reading the bite, it's not a big issue, so that's why we can use a 1.5 ounce tip, because as we all know, the method feeder is a self-hooking way of fishing. So you're allowed to use the elasticated feeders on this venue, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing. No, it doesn't have to be free running or anything like that, so we've just got a lovely elasticated open method feeder to kick off with. However, one thing that we have learnt on commercials is that, and it's something we'll talk about later, and that is quite often a normal method style feeder can be a better way to present the bait. We don't always know why, but you've always got to have that option so that we can find out what's going to be the best. Now the bait tray is super simple, just the way I like it, and that is I've got some 6mm fishery pellets. Now these are the ones that I'm going to be loose feeding by hand at about 5 or 6 meters, and I can build that line up nice and steady. I've just put a little bit of water on those and drained it off just to make sure that they sink really nice and quickly. We don't want them floating about, you know, before they sink. So I've got some fishery pellets there. I've then got, again, because it's fishery pellet rules here, I've got some micro pellets. They're about 2mm pellets. They've been softened down, dampened, and they're the ones that we're going to obviously be putting into the feeder. I've got another batch of pellets here. I always like to have a batch of the same pellet that I'm just constantly working. We've got a nice bright sunshine today, we've got the wind blowing, and sometimes if you haven't got a side tray cover or anything like that that I'm not using today, your pellets can dry out a little bit, and that just means that I can constantly make sure that these are in tip-top condition. Now for hook baits, again, it's very simple. I've got a small selection of pellets there. There's a combination of different pellets in there, 6mm, 8mm, different colour, and that's a typical selection that I'd carry with me, so we can try pellet on a band. And then the other hook bait that I'm looking at is quite simply one of the most popular baits for commercials these days is a wafter. Okay, and as you can see, different colours in there. It's amazing how many times you can catch on one colour and none of the others. So we've got a nice selection there. And they are 8mm, which are going to be coupled perfectly with this size 14 hook. And that is it. The only other thing I've got on the tray is a tub of water. Something that often gets overlooked, and I'll show you why a little bit later on, and that's because I like to make sure my bait is working properly, but I can show you that a little bit later on. So that is it. You couldn't get much more simple than that. So we're going to kick off fishing negative towards that island. I haven't got any special glugs or anything at this stage. These are just natural fishery pellets. I'm going to kick off with an 8mm bandem, starting on orange. We'll see what happens. Now I'm not fishing clipped up, all right, and that's just because that means I can be nice and mobile. So I haven't put too many pellets on this feeder. I'm kicking off with an open method feeder, and I'll be trying the normal method feeder on that short line. So I'm just going to start off the front edge of that island, not too tight, and obviously I've let that fall under its own natural weight because I'm not clipped up, so it's fallen vertically. And obviously we've got the option now. We've got the option of going, if we don't catch there, obviously if we're getting liners, that might suggest that there's fish shorter somewhere. But if I don't catch or get anything there, I've got the option of going to the left, which is closer to the island, which is going into shallower water and obviously closer to those bushes. But then I've also got the option of coming closer, so I could drop it at halfway. And then I've even got this open water to my right where I can fish in that open water as well. So we've got lots of options. And the key to fishing like this is really having a few options so that you've got lots of things to try whilst you're building up that short line. We've got ducks on the short line already, so already that one's, it's got a bit of activity on it already. So as you'd expect with a line like that, that could take half an hour, it could take 2 hours to build up, we don't know. But the main thing is we've got 2 or 3 options out there to try where hopefully we can put 1 or 2 fish in the net whilst we're building that line up, where when we go on it, the ideal scenario is that there's some fish there waiting for us so you catch straight away. So the first thing is to get a feel for what's happening out there, and obviously if we could put a couple of fish in the net, then that'd be great. The short line, because I'm fishing at such short range, I can feed it by hand. So no need for a catapult, and all I'm doing is, these are the 6mm pellets, that's all they are, nothing on them. Put a little bit of water on them, and that's just to make sure they sink straight away through that water tension. And all I'm going to be feeding is probably 6 to 8 pellets, and I'm going to be feeding that about every 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to keep it ticking over. Don't want to feed too much, the water's too cold. And I picked a marker of that tree, and all I'm doing is simply underarming it to there. Because on this lake you can catch as short as that. Sometimes you can catch much shorter, especially later on in the session, but by picking that spot there, you're not in the really shallow water and you're not in the really deep water. It's just a nice happy medium, hopefully. And because it's just there, I could just simply underarm the feeder on that line at any stage. So we'll give this a while on this line, and at any stage I wish, I can just simply drop a feeder on there. I don't have to pick any other rods up or anything like that, and if there's nothing then I don't get a quick response, I can just go back out there and keep on building that line up. But the key at this stage is, whilst we haven't caught any fish, is to just not feed too much. You don't want to blow it too early. Just keep trickling a bit of bait in, and if there's more fish there than what we expect, then we can simply start feeding more. Well, we finally got one. Took a little bit of finding, I'll openly admit. We've been getting lots of little indications, really slow. Sure that the line bites. So there have been fish in between here and there, but strongly suspect they're up in the water. But we've got one, and it's shot off really quickly. There are lots and lots of F1s in here, but there are lots of proper carp as well, so it'll be interesting to see what it is. I've actually switched down now to a 6mm hard banded pellet. So I haven't changed anything, I haven't put any glugs in or changed the feeder. It's just, I think it's just been a location thing. But when you're getting indications, it's good because at least it's telling you that there are some fish in front of you somewhere. But when the water's still cold, it can often be a case of just trying to find them. This one's still got loads of energy in him. Look at him running. These are lovely 10-foot rods, these. You can give fish loads of stick if you need to. We're not in a match today, so we're not going to do that, but we're going to enjoy every fish we get today. But it's still early, still feeding that that short line. That short line's probably at about 5 meters actually. So we're really expecting to get some fish on that, but quite often, the longer you can build a line like that up, the better it will be when you go on it. That's the theory anyway. And the perfect scenario is to be putting fish in the net, or some fish in the net, whilst that line's getting stronger. He's got loads of energy, this one. I can't believe how hard this one's fighting now. I thought it was going to be an F1, but it's a proper carp, this one. There we go, it's a good stamp to start with. So yeah, we've probably had about 4 or 5 different casts out there in different spots. And that's a lovely, it's a good looking fish as well. Lovely scales on him. Let's have a look. That's it, just on a hard banded pellet. Look at the scales on that one. And I bet he's got loads of energy still. We could tell by the way he was going off. There we go. Great stamp to start on. So yeah, we found a fish. So now it'll just be a case of going back to that same spot and see if there's some more there, because we know that they can ball up, and if you can find a few, you might get a run. And the main thing is keep those 6 to 8 pellets going in on that short line. Well, we've had a few fish now and they weren't easy to find. We're still getting a few liners and things, so there are 1 or 2 fish moving about. However, it's time to try that short line now. We've been building it up. We've tried not to feed too much because obviously we don't know how many fish are going to be there, if there are any. So we've got the same setup, except we're going to be changing the feeder. And the reason why we changed the feeder, I can't give you an exact reason why this actually works and why it's panned out like this, but in our experience over the last 3 or 4 years, fishing venues like this, where you're fishing close in, we fish a lot of feeder orientated competitions, and just because we're fishing a feeder doesn't mean to say we can't target these margin lines, which we know are so important on venues like this. And for some reason we found out that a normal method feeder, as opposed to the open side, the feeder with sides on it, we've just caught so many more fish with it. We don't honestly know why, but obviously what you do get with that is you get a bigger spread of bait. Now, whether that's part of the reason, we don't know. Maybe it's because it looks a little bit more natural because there aren't sides around the feeder. Maybe it's a little bit more discreet. We don't know. However, when we're targeting margins, a lot of the time we're targeting bigger fish. So maybe it is because these are a little bit more discreet. Maybe that's why, because they're obviously bigger, older, more experienced fish. But whatever the reason, in our experience, we've definitely found these to be better. So we made a nice switch to that, okay? Same hook length and everything, same hook as before. I've got a band on there, I'm going to be using, there's a fish there, rising, waiting for us. There we go. Going to kick off with a hard banded pellet, and we're actually using this with a longer stem. Now the reason why we're using a longer stem is purely because there's more elastic in there. We're going to be dropping this in at, say, about 5 meters at such short range, and if you are after hard fighting powerful fish, having that extra bit of elastic is really going to give you that extra little bit of cushion. When we pick up on what we're hoping, we're probably going to be quite vicious pulls in at such short range. So there's definitely 1 fish there waiting for us. So we're just going to fire about another 6 to 8 pellets in on that line and then drop the feeder straight over the top where hopefully there's some waiting for us. So just plop it in, feather it in, because obviously you don't want to cause too much disturbance. Obviously sinking the line at such short range isn't a massive issue. However, one of the things that can really help, and one we always try to do, is we try to have a slack line wherever we can. But it's such short range, it's a self-hooking way of fishing. When it goes, you're gonna see the bite. So I've got a slack line now, and the reason why I've done that is because you want to encourage the line to be down out of the way. If I had a tight tip, a tight line to that feeder, as you can imagine, your line's going through the water tight, and if there are fish around the feed, which, you know, we think there are, that's how you can easily get line bites. You can get liners, you know, and that can lead to all sorts of problems. One of the problems obviously is you could foul up fish, which is what you want to avoid wherever possible. But the other thing as well is, which is not something a lot of people really think about, is that if you do get a fish go across your line, it can quite easily move your feeder, and that's going against everything we're trying to achieve with a method feeder, isn't it? Because you want your hook bait to remain right in the middle of that little ball of pellets. So we've got a normal method feeder on now. It's only 15 gram, this one. But obviously when those pellets break down around the feeder, you've got a nice little spread there, and the pellets almost hide that feeder. So we're getting 1 or 2 indications there. So it's telling us that there are 1 or 2 fish there. There are lots of silverfish in here as well, so we don't know what they're going to be. But the key to this sort of fishing, just like with all method feeder fishing really, is you don't want to be striking at those little indications, you know. It's a self-hooking way of fishing, so when the tip goes properly, the fish is hooked. It's hooked already. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you're not going to snatch at those bites. You want to make sure the fish is on. Sit on your hands. When there's one on, it's pretty obvious. And the other thing as well, which is something that we see a lot of people when they're fishing the method, they still strike. There we go. That looks like it's on, and that is on. They strike, but you don't need to strike. This feels like could be a bream, this one. There's no need to strike. The fish is already hooked. All you need to do is just pick up. Looks like it's, or is it? Let's have a look. The fish is already on. You know, you don't need to strike. I see people striking into fish, and that's how you pull out a fish and you lose fish. You can even break on them as well. So the fish is already hooked. As long as you pick up at the right time, when you're sure the tip's going and it's obvious it's on. So that looks like it might be one of those big hybrids. The hook's come out in the net. It is. He's really energetic. Look at that one. Now, no, it's not the target, but that is almost as heavy as an F1. So we obviously want to take them as well. Certainly we'd want to win a match. And when you're fishing at such short range like this, you can obviously catch them really quickly as well. And because it was a silverfish, we've put a bit more weight in the net, but we've caught it on carp fishing gear. So if that fish had been 20 pound, we've still got every chance of landing it because we've got proper gear on. Well, we've been getting indications down there right from going on it, to be fair, so obviously building it up has helped. There've been more F1s caught today, definitely. We have seen carp cruising through the peg, but obviously sometimes the time of day and just constantly building a line up can sometimes bring the odd better fish in. This is a better fish. Funnily enough, we caught most of the fish on a 6mm pellet. However, it was strange how we just kept getting indications, so I switched to a wafter, abandoned wafter, and I caught 2 quick fish, then it went dead again. Getting little indications, so I've just slipped a 6mm hard pellet on, just to try and trick one on. They're what we've been feeding after all. And we're into a nice fish now. We know that these margin fish can be big, and they're important to land them, so that's what we obviously want to try and do. But it's definitely been a day where we've had fish in the peg and you've had to kind of make sure that they're on, you know. Don't strike at everything. Try and turn indications into fish. And as we know in fishing, feeding's massive. That normal method feed has definitely been better than the open method feeder on this short line. And that's why we've got different feeders to try, and with these quick change systems, it's dead easy just to switch them over and find out what is the best on each day. So if you're getting indications and you're feeding and stuff, just keep bringing the changes, you know, adjust your feeding, try a different feeder. Sometimes it's the hook you're using as well, step hook size or down sometimes, but this is a size 14 that we've got on, which is matched nicely with a 6mm hard pellet. Let's see if we can get him. I'm going to net him in between these 2 keep nets. That elastic's doing its job, which is good. It charged out of the peg when it went. There was no messing that the fish was on. And that elastic obviously helped absorb it on that initial run. Set your drag on your reel as well, that'll always help with these big powerful fish. You're not fishing to a line clip, so you can just undo the drag and and the fish can run. Just a case of trying to get his mouth up. This is the feeder version of this rod, which gives you that extra power. Once you've got air in its mouth, you can scoop them up. And that's why we're using a nice deep, big landing net head like we've got there. You know, you can land bigger fish with smaller nets, but obviously a big net like that just makes them much easier to scoop. Well, there we go, that's a lovely fish to finish on. Match winning fish, really. But that just goes to show that simple techniques, simple techniques, just a 10-foot rod, one rod fishing different areas of the swim. Just adjust your feeding accordingly and fish with tackle that's going to give you a chance to land these fish. It just shows that you can have a fantastic session, even at the moment when it still hasn't got to summer yet.